Language is often called the great equalizer, a bridge that connects the disparate corners of our world. But in the hallowed, dust-mote-filled halls of elite academia, language is too often treated as a gate. It is a high wall topped with a razor wire of accent, vocabulary, and pedigree, designed to keep the others out. We are told that to be heard, we must sound a certain way. We must speak with a clipped, polished cadence of the colonizer. But what happens when the gatekeepers are forced to face the very people they deem unworthy? What happens when the broken English of the underdog carries more truth than the polished rhetoric of the elite? This is a story of a cold winter night in London, a team of 3 students from Manila who had just enough money for plane tickets and instant noodles, and the moment they silenced the most arrogant room in the world, not with their accent, but with their mind. The venue was a kind of place that smelled of centuries-old privilege, a mixture of mahogany, leather, and the damp, musty scent of old books that have never been touched by a poor person's hands. It was the grand final of the World Universities Debating Championship, hosted that year in a historic Union Hall in the heart of London. The ceiling was high and vaulted, disappearing into shadows, while the walls were lined with oil paintings of dead men in wigs who stared down judgmentally at the floor below. The silence in the room was heavy, oppressive, the kind of silence that demands you shrink yourself to fit into it. In the center of this intimidating theater stood the finalists on government, the defending champions from the Royal Academy of Europe, a team so polished they looked like they had been born in suits. On opposition, the team from the Philippines, sitting in ill-fitting blazers they had borrowed from faculty members back home. The disparity between the two teams was not just visual, it was atmospheric. The Royal Academy team, led by a tall, striking debater named Sebastian with a voice like melted chocolate, moved with the easy, languid confidence of predators who knew the jungle belonged to them. They joked with the judges, they winked at the audience, they checked their expensive watches with a performative boredom that suggested this was all just a tedious formality before their coronation. Across the aisle, the Filipino team, Mark, a nervous researcher, BEA, the fierce whip speaker, and Leo, the team captain, sat frozen. They were gripping their pens so tightly their knuckles were white. They were not just fighting the other team. They were fighting the jet lag, the hunger from skipping meals to save podium, and the crushing weight of knowing that their university had scraped together its last funds to send them here. But the tension that night didn't start at the podium. It had started 2 days earlier, in the brightly lit, noisy cafeteria during the tournament social. It was an inciting incident that turned a competitive rivalry into a blood feud. The Filipino team had been standing in line for coffee, excitedly discussing their previous round in their native Taglish, a fast, fluid mix of Tagalog and English. They were laughing, loud and joyful, taking up space in a way that visibly annoyed the European contingent behind them. Sebastian, the Royal Academy captain, had tapped Leo on the shoulder. When Leo turned around, smiling, expecting a friendly interaction, Sebastian had sneered, his face twisted in a mask of polite disgust. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying over the clatter of silverware. "Could you keep it down? It's hard to concentrate on intellectual matters when there's so much static noise. Perhaps save the chatter for when you're back in the call center." The insult hit the room like a physical slap. The cafeteria went quiet. It wasn't just a rude comment. It was a surgical strike at the Filipino identity, a derogatory stereotype wrapped in a posh accent. Call center. It was a dismissal of their entire existence, reducing their intellect to service labor, implying that their English was only good enough to save, not to lead. Leo had frozen, his smile dying on his lips. He felt the heat rise up his neck, a mix of shame and sudden, blinding rage. Around them, a few other teams from Western universities snickered, hiding their smiles behind coffee cups. The message was clear. You are guests here. Do not forget your place. Sebastian didn't even wait for a response. He simply turned back to his team, laughing as if he had just swatted away a fly. That moment in the cafeteria became the fuel that burned in the engine of the Filipino team for the next 48 hours. Back in their cramped hostel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, they didn't cry. They didn't pack their bags. BEA, the smallest of the three but possessing a spirit made of tungsten steel, paced the floorboards until they creaked. "They think we are static," she hissed, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the hunt. "They think our English is a joke? Fine, let them laugh. We will make them choke on it." They spent the night studying, not sleeping. They reviewed every speech Sebastian had ever given, dissecting his arguments, finding the hollow points in his rhetoric. They weren't preparing for debate anymore. They were preparing for an execution. Fast forward to the final. The motion, the topic they had to debate, was announced 15 minutes before the round. This House believes that post-colonial nations should reject all forms of Western aid. It was a heavy, complex geopolitical topic, and fate, with its cruel sense of humor, had placed the Europeans on government proposing the rejection and the Filipinos on opposition defending the aid. It seemed like a trap. The Europeans, the colonizers, were going to lecture the colonized on independence. The irony was thick enough to choke on. As the teams took their seats, Sebastian looked across the aisle at Leo and offered a small, pitying smile. He mouthed the words, "Good luck," but his eyes said, "Do try not to embarrass yourselves." The debate began, and Sebastian rose as a prime minister. His speech was a masterclass in rhetorical flourish. He spoke of sovereignty and dignity and shackles of gold. He used words like hegemony and neo-colonial paternalism with a silky smoothness that mesmerized the judges. He paced the floor, using his hands to paint invisible pictures, his Oxford accent echoing off the vaulted ceiling like a choir. But woven into his beautiful sentences were subtle, barbed jabs. He made references to developing nations lacking the linguistic nuance to understand true freedom, looking pointedly at the Filipino bench. He wasn't just arguing the motion. He was arguing that the opposition was too simple-minded to understand the complexities of their own oppression. The audience, mostly from Western universities, nodded along, hypnotized by his cadence. When Sebastian sat down, the room erupted in polite, rapturous applause. It felt like the debate was already over. The bar had been set so high it was in the stratosphere. Then, Leo stood up. He walked to the podium slowly. He was shorter than Sebastian, his blazer sleeves a little too long, his hair unstyled. He placed his index cards on the lectern. His hands were shaking. You could see the tremor from the back of the room. He took a breath, and for a terrifying second, he said nothing. The silence stretched. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, whispering something to his deputy, a smirk playing on his lips. They thought Leo had choked. They thought the call center agent had forgotten his script. But Leo wasn't choking. He was calibrating. He looked at the judges, then at Sebastian. When he spoke, his voice wasn't silky. It was rough. It carried the hard, staccato rhythm of Manila streets. "The Prime Minister speaks beautifully," Leo began, his English heavily accented, the PS and FS hitting hard. "He speaks of dignity like it is a theory in a textbook. He speaks of starvation like it is a metaphor. But I am confused." Leo paused, leaning over the podium. "Because where I come from, hunger is not a metaphor. It is the sound of a stomach growling at 3 a.m. And dignity? Dignity is not rejecting bread because you do not like the baker. Dignity is surviving so you can fight another day." The room shifted. It was subtle, but the air changed. Leo didn't use big words. He didn't use Latin phrases. He used brutal, visceral imagery. He dismantled Sebastian's abstract philosophy with concrete reality. He argued that rejecting aid wasn't pride. It was suicide for the vulnerable. "It is easy to preach about breaking shackles when you have never worn them," Leo said, his voice rising in volume. "The government team treats nations like chess pieces. We are not pieces. We are people, and we do not need your permission to survive." He sat down to a different kind of applause, less polite, more stunned. The judges were scribbling furiously. Sebastian's smile had vanished. The debate turned into a brawl. The deputy prime minister from the Royal Academy stood up, clearly rattled, and tried to pivot back to high theory. But in his frustration, he made a fatal mistake. He decided to attack the form rather than the substance. While the opposition's passion is commendable, he sneered, we are here to debate policy, not to engage in emotional theatrics. We need precision in our language, not just sob stories. He mocked Leo's pronunciation of hegemony, correcting it loudly mid-speech. It was a low blow, a return to the cafeteria insult. The audience gasped. It was uncomfortable. It was bullying. The rounds progressed, blow for blow. The Europeans were technically flawless, but they were coming off as cold, detached, and increasingly arrogant. The Filipinos were messy, passionate, but undeniably human. It all came down to the final speaker for the opposition, BEA, the whip. Her job was to summarize the debate and deliver the knockout punch. She stood up. She didn't look at her notes. She looked directly at Sebastian. BEA was 5 feet tall, but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. She adjusted the microphone. The feedback whined for a split second, piercing the tension. The silence in the hall was absolute. No one was breathing. You mock us for being service workers, BEA continued, her voice cracking with emotion now, tears threatening to spill but refused permission to fall. But you forget one thing. The servant sees everything. The servant knows the master better than the master knows himself. She turned to the judges. They offered you flowery lies wrapped in the Queen's English. We offered you the ugly truth in the language of the oppressed. Do not vote for the accent. Vote for the argument. Because if you vote for them today, you are not proving that they are right. You are only proving that you are deaf. BEA slammed her hand on the table. Opposition begs to propose. She sat down. For 3 seconds, there was no sound. It was as if the room had been depressurized. Then, the back of the room, the students from Africa, from Asia, from South America, stood up. It started as a slow clap, then a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous, foot-stomping ovation. The judges looked at each other, wide-eyed. Sebastian looked at his notebook, his face pale, his hands trembling as he tried to uncap his pen but couldn't. He knew, in that silence before the roar, he knew. The adjudication process took an hour. Usually, the teams leave the room, but the tension was so high that everyone stayed in their seats. The Filipinos sat huddled together, holding hands, heads bowed in prayer. The Europeans sat stiffly, staring straight ahead, the facade of boredom completely gone, replaced by the rigid terror of impending loss. The chief adjudicator, a stern elderly professor known for his harsh critiques, finally walked back into the room. He carried the ballot paper like a death sentence. He approached the podium. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the Royal Academy team, then at the Filipinos. In the grand final, the adjudicator began, his voice dry. We saw a clash of two worlds. One world prioritized the elegance of form. The other prioritized the necessity of substance. He paused. The heartbeat of every person in the room seemed to synchronize. We believe that while the government team's rhetoric was polished, it ultimately failed to engage with the reality on the ground. They debated a theoretical world. The opposition debated the real one. He took a deep breath. And regarding the manner of speech, we find that clarity is not defined by accent, but by truth. The decision is unanimous. The world champions, from the opposition, the Philippines. The scream that came from Leo was not human. It was a release of years of invisibility. He collapsed into Mark's arms. BEA buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The room exploded again. Streamers, imaginary or real, the sensory overload made it feel like confetti was falling, seemed to fill the air. The European team stood up, shell-shocked. Sebastian looked at the celebration, at the call center agent who had just dismantled his entire worldview. He hesitated, then slowly walked across the aisle. The cameras flashed blindingly. This was the visual beat that would go viral. Sebastian, the symbol of the old guard, extending a hand to Leo. But Leo didn't just shake it. He looked Sebastian in the eye, the same eyes that had looked down on him in the cafeteria. And he nodded. A single, dignified nod. He took the hand, not as a subordinate, but as a superior. The camera captured the contrast, the manicured hand of the European against the calloused, shaking hand of the Filipino. It was the image of the century. The aftermath was chaotic. Reporters swarmed the Filipino team. How do you feel? What is your message to your country? BA, wiping her eyes, took the microphone. She looked directly into the camera lens, speaking to the millions of Filipinos watching back home who had been mocked for their Carabao English. This is for everyone who has been told to quiet down, she said, her voice steady now. Your voice is valid. Your English is valid. Your story is valid. Do not let anyone correct your truth. Back in the hostel that night, the team didn't go out to party. They were too exhausted, too emotionally drained. They sat on the floor of their tiny room, the massive, gleaming World Championship trophy sitting incongruously in the middle of the cheap carpet. They ate instant noodles again, using the trophy cup to hold the broth. They laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh. It wasn't the nervous laughter of the oppressed. It was a deep, belly-shaking laughter of the victors. They replayed the debate, mimicking Sebastian's accent, reclaiming the power he had tried to wield over them. The story broke the internet by morning. The clip of BA's "A Servant Knows a Master" speech was shared millions of times. It sparked a global conversation about linguistic discrimination in academia. People from India, Nigeria, Singapore, and the Caribbean duetted the video, sharing their own stories of being mocked for their accents. The Royal Academy team issued a formal apology statement, but the damage to their reputation was permanent. They were no longer the golden boys of debate. They were the faces of an outdated, crumbling elitism. But the most poignant moment came a week later, when the team arrived back in Manila. They expected a small welcome from their parents. Instead, the airport was packed. There were banners, drums, and thousands of students. A massive sign hung from the arrival railing. "The world heard you." As they walked through the crowd, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, tugged on BA's shirt. She handed her a note. It read, in crooked handwriting, "I want to speak like you." BA knelt down and hugged the girl, whispering, "No, speak like you." The victory didn't just change the lives of Leo, BA, and Mark. It changed the landscape of the debating circuit. In the years that followed, judges became more conscious of their biases. Teams with heavy accents began to win more, emboldened by the Philippine victory. The Manila style of debating, passionate, grounded, visceral, became a studied technique. The gatekeepers had been forced to unlock the gate, and the floodwaters had rushed in. Sebastian eventually retired from debating. Rumor has it he went into corporate law, where his polished lies were more appreciated. But those who knew him said he was never quite the same in public speaking engagements. He developed a tic, a hesitation. Before he spoke, he would scan the room, looking for the quiet ones, the ones in the ill-fitting suits, the ones he used to ignore. He had learned the hard way that the most dangerous person in the room is not the one with the loudest voice, but the one with the most approve. As for the Filipino team, they finished their degrees. They didn't become politicians or celebrities. Leo became a teacher in a rural province. Mark became a human rights lawyer. BA did, in fact, work in a call center for a while to save money for her masters, wearing her headset like a crown. They remained humble, but they walked differently. They walked with the knowledge that they had faced a dragon in its own lair, armed only with their broken tongue, and they had slain it. The trophy still sits in the dusty display cabinet of their university. The gold plating is chipping slightly, and the nameplate is tarnished. But if you stand close to it, you can almost hear the echoes of that night. You can hear the creak of the leather chaise, the sneer of the privileged, and the thunderous, terrifying silence that fell when the underdog finally roared. It serves as a reminder to every student who walks past it. Intelligence does not have an accent. In the end, the debate wasn't about Western aid. It wasn't about geopolitics or economics. It was a debate about existence. It was a trial where the Filipinos were asked to justify their presence in the room, and they did so by tearing the room down. They proved that English is not a possession of the West to be loaned out on loan. It is a tool that belongs to whoever wields it with the most courage. And somewhere in a high-rise office in London, or a library in New York, there are still people who sneer at bad English. There are still people who hear a Filipino accent and think subservient. But because of that night in London, there are now millions who know better. They know that behind the accent is a fire that can burn down empires. They know that if you mock the way a Filipino speaks, you better be ready to listen to what they have to say. So, the next time you hear someone struggling with a second language, stuttering over a vowel or mixing up a tense, do not laugh. Do not look away. Remember the Royal Academy. Remember the silence of the Oxford Union. And remember that the person stumbling over their words might just be the smartest person in the room, sharpening their knife, waiting for the moment to cut you down with the truth. The giants fell once. They can fall again.